I realize that I am in between you and a good meal. And Stingery is a cool place to be. I've been there. We had one of our holiday functions there. So before I get started, I wanted to have a little fun here. And we're going to talk about name the inventor. So let's see if you've got your trivial caps on here. Who invented the printing press? All right, there you go. Johannes Gutenberg. Who invented the light bulb? Thomas Edison, Joseph Swan. Who invented the telephone? Alexander Graham Bell. And I think this is probably going to stump you guys. Who invented the integrated circuit, or known as the microchip? Ooh, that hurts, because all of us have these mobile phones, computers, in our cars, everyday lives. Ooh, wow. Jack Kilby and Robert Noyce. So Jack Kilby worked for Texas Instruments, and Robert Noyce was co-founder of Fairchild Semiconductor and also Intel Corporation, and mentor to Steve Jobs. So these are the two gentlemen that invented the microchip. The picture to your right in the upper right-hand corner was the first microchip that Jack Kilby, when he was at Texas Instruments, had designed. And then in the lower right-hand corner, you have a microscope image of an Intel processor. The challenge that these two gentlemen had to tackle in the 50s was this concept of tyranny in numbers. Basically, you could not get increased computing horsepower unless you physically had people soldering more transistors together. So it just didn't scale, because humans had to physically solder more to get more computing power. So really, deployment of software is similar to that, in that we have to tackle what we call tyranny of computers. Because installing software, I see it in two categories. One is task-centric, where you have an end user who is the installer, administrator, and the same individual, so single-level permissions. They're usually within one location, one or two computers, and it's very typical of consumer applications, iTunes, Picasa, etc. But now when we go to deploying software, this is more focused towards support-centric. How do I support a large number of users and manage the software that I'm deploying, not necessarily just the install? So this is commonly where the end user, installer, and administrator are different individuals, and usually have multiple level permissions. And it's typical for hundreds of computers are targeted in a heterogeneous, dynamic environment in multiple locations. So typical enterprise applications, ERP, ELN, JChem4XL. And really, the fundamental challenge here is we are slave to the number of computers in getting the software out to them. So, you know, when we look at or approach deploying software, we look at it in, does it fit into our solution delivery strategy? And what I mean by that is that we look at software fitting under three different mediums of solution delivery. One is the Microsoft Office suite, typically Excel, and I think you'll hear more of JChem4XL tomorrow. But it's familiar. It's ubiquitous. Everybody has it on their computer and knows how to use it. It's so common. And really, it spans the whole corporate strata, from the entry-level person all the way to the executive. But it usually requires active updating. So if you're running Office 2003, you have to uninstall 2003 and install 2007. It's not passive. The other solution delivery that we choose is a data query and visualization. And some of these are familiar to you, IJC, NIME, Spotfire. But these are advanced query and visualizations. And within our industry, they're generally targeted towards the specialists, scientists, and researchers. And historically, they've also had been active updating. But more recently, IJC is an example. It's a WebStart application, and so it updates passively, and that's nice. The third solution or framework that we deliver solutions is through the web. An example of that, SharePoint, and a lot of our proprietary applications are built upon web-based technologies. Now, these tools focus on operational things, getting things done, moving workflow processes along. And usually they're targeted to multiple corporate groups or a specific scientific discipline. So, for example, compound registration is generally targeted towards chemistry. And the fact that it's web-based, it's passive updating, and it's centrally updated. So these are generally just container frameworks to deliver solutions into. So from a schematic representation, this is what we're talking about here. We've got the Microsoft Office product suite, we've got the data query visualization tools, and then also the web-based tools. But it's important that we pick the best framework for the solution delivery. Generally, biologists are really in favor of Excel. And so for us in TCal, Takeda, California, we will try to build tools and solutions for biologists in Excel because they're using it all the time. So why Microsoft Excel? Well, it's well suited for data visualization. Inherently in it, it has tables and charts. No need to reinvent the wheel there. It's familiar, like I said, and ubiquitous. It's a part of ELN solutions. You know, they'll have a data grid. Chemists are familiar with SAR tables, templates. It's a proven cheminformatics add-ins. There's a number of vendors that have add-ins for Excel. And we have watched JChem4XL mature over the years, and we feel that it's at a point where it's mature enough and that we can integrate it. Excel is extendable. You can choose VBA, .NET, and extend Excel to your heart's content. And Excel, we don't underestimate the value of Excel in its communication capability. It's printed out. You know, spreadsheets are printed out, SAR reports are printed out, scribbled on, shared with colleagues. They're used and included in presentations and, attachments in email communications. So we had to, Excel is great, and we wanted to deploy JChem4XL, but we still need to create a business case. For us, it's easy enough to install software or deploy software. But it's another thing to support it long term. How am I going to upgrade it? My analysts and support people are going to be constantly on the phone, getting emails from our end users saying, this doesn't work, how do I do this or how do I do that? The update or patch didn't work, etc. So what we looked at in creating a business case for JChem4XL was, does it align with our solution delivery strategy? I think that was a yes for us because we deliver a lot of our solutions through Excel. Is the value proposition immediate and long-term? So meaning that if we deploy JChem4XL, all our users are going to find value in usage of it. But also, does it fit into a long-term strategy in how we want to provide solutions to our end users? And this point here is that we had essentially an architecture or framework for our Excel add-in. We have an internal Excel add-in, and we wanted to make sure that whatever cheminformatics functionality that we had already built in were going to be accommodated, and JChem4XL was going to provide that feature. The point here about low overhead for Excel and what I term Excel hijacking. I think a lot of us have installed Excel add-ins, and all of a sudden Excel is doing things that you didn't want it to. You install it, and you try to use Excel, but Excel takes now a minute to start up. And all you wanted to do was look at an attachment from a colleague. We didn't want that. We didn't want a solution that hijacked Excel. And the other factor was it easy to deploy? and to maintain. So with all of those business case requirements, we really honed in on, is it easy to deploy and maintain? Because at the end of the day, installing and deploying software is very easy, but maintaining and supporting it is the challenge. I don't know about many of you, but there's a litany of operating systems and Office versions, and it's really hard to identify and try to deploy software to all of them. It's just nearly impossible because they're moving targets. So what we wanted to do was say, okay, what is our target that we are going to try to hit? And so what we set out to is we're going to deploy this onto Windows 7, 32-bit operating system, and we're going to deploy it to Office 2007. And we wanted to make sure that was the target that we hit and kind of narrowed down and gave us focus. This is a topic near and dear to my heart, vendor license file strategies. And the reason that I bring this up is that I like the model that JChem4XL provides is because they don't actually just have one way to actually handle licensing. There's multiple ways in JChem4XL to handle licensing. But what I wanted to highlight is that vendors have chosen various different ways of enforcing license. The first one with, we can think about there's no license file or key, and that relies on an honesty policy. Very rare nowadays. The time bomb. Many of you are familiar with where you have to get that license file to run for that 1 year of time. And if that piece of core software, if you don't get that license file in by December, the end of December, your system is busted. And I'm not going to name any vendors here, but we've encountered that on occasion. And that is the worst time of the year because I'm on holiday. I'm on Christmas vacation, and I have to be stressed about making sure that license file is installed. Installation of a registry key, traditional license file, and then the central license file server. We chose to actually deploy JChem4XL using the central license file server. And this has been definitely something easy for us. And like I said earlier, maintenance and support was paramount for us. So we chose that. So the JChem4XL deployment steps. So we first deployed the license file to our Apache web server. We then set the ChemAxon license URL environment variable through a logon batch script as the first step to our end users. We then did a silent install of JChem4XL. So we forced reboot of all of the workstations. So we knew that Excel was not running. And then the users would then log in, and what this would do is install the JChem4XL MSI file and everything based upon the chemistry profile users. And then users were notified of just to activate the plugin. That was probably not optimal, but I think most of our users were able to click the one button. It was real easy to do that. So that was done through the network. And the final thing is we had ChemAxon come on site, do a training of our end users, and to help document. So post-deployment, we had very few support issues. Most issues reported related to that one-time activation, and that's why I highlighted it was probably less than ideal. So we had approximately 30% of our chemistry staff adopt JChem4XL. At the surface level, you go 30%. Gosh, that doesn't seem that great. But if you think about that, we only had one training. We had ChemAxon come on, train one time. We didn't promote it. We just said, come to this training. And 30% of our chemistry staff found value in that. And they used it primarily to calculate chemical descriptors and view and manipulate SD files. So what about our non-users? Why didn't they use it? The main reason was that they felt that they were getting all the information that they needed and functionality through other tools. And the other one was that it wasn't integrated into our infrastructure. So for us in the informatics group, we said, well, we can easily increase that approximate 30% very easily just by addressing those 2 points of the non-users, because we could easily integrate it into our infrastructure. And what that means, not just within our tools, but with the training of workflow processes, that this tool, JChem4XL, fits into this workflow process. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have to physically integrate that tool into a software component. But we are going to do that too. So what we are focused now in the post-deployment is actually integrating JChem4XL more. So the future integration and customizations for us is identifier services. Right now what we have in our plugin is that you can put in all kinds of different identifiers. And then boom, structure shows up. What we would like to do is use JChem4XL to show those structures. What we're working on is enhancing our chemical descriptor calculator profiler that we already have, relying more on JChem4XL. And then, like I said earlier, using workflow training in saying, okay, you know, you're trying to accomplish this. Here's how JChem4XL can fit into that workflow process. The other part is that we are planning to refactor the Takeda Excel add-in. We're going to break it apart into 3 different add-ins: core, chemistry, and you see how the chemistry component, ChemAxon's JChem4XL fits into there. In the biology, we already are licensing IDBS Excel fit. And then pharmacology, we have functionality in there. And then that's just a screenshot of our Excel add-in. So in summary, the central push deployment of JChem was successful to more than 80 workstations through a login script, and we have planned for an additional 80. License file management through a web server using the chem license URL environment variable was ideal. And the reason that we chose that mechanism is that oftentimes you're going to license not all of JChem products or ChemAxon products. You're going to say, okay, well, I want this calculator plugin, this calculator plugin. But as you show value and the users are using it, and they start asking for more additional calculators or more additional features, we don't want to be managing this license file on every workstation. So this allows us just to go to our central Apache web server, just update the license file with additional ChemAxon calculator plugins, and voila, all of our end users have additional functionality. Moderate user adoption after 1 training session, potential improvement through further integration. And that's what we discovered. We successfully pushed out a patch through a silent install, and so we were really happy about that, because it's not just the one deploy, but subsequent patches and maintenance pushes. So one of our developers is actually switching to live structures for naming instead of the images that we generate in our ID service. And then what we have found so far is that we have had virtually no support calls from our end users, and yet they're still using it. And that's the end game for us, was that we wanted very minimal support. So I want to acknowledge my team. I want to acknowledge actually some of my colleagues from Japan, because we had talked about JChem4XL and the value proposition it could provide to our end users. I want to thank Doug Drake and all the support staff at ChemAxon working with us to figure out an ideal way of handling the license file. So thank you for your time.
I'm going to the question of the adoption rate. How does that 30% compare to the previous Excel plugins you used? And had you, meanwhile, already retired those other Excel plugins?
So it was definitely much lower. But like I said earlier, by providing tools that are, or I would say almost a necessity within a workflow process, you almost demand that the user has to use the tool, right? So in this deployment, the users didn't have to demand, or they weren't forced to use the tool. It was like, frosting on the cake if I wanted to use it. So the fact that 30% of our chemists chose to use it, even though they weren't really forced to use it because they had to do something within a workflow process, my management actually asked the same question. Oh, 30%, that seems a little bit low. And then I explained to them the rationale behind that 30%, and they said, oh, okay. So our plan is that the Excel plugin that we have built in-house will actually leverage JChem4XL. So it will then become a requirement just like Excel fit will be. So it will be required.
One of the common complaints with Excel plugins is that they slow down Excel. Do you see any issues with this, especially if you're also using Excel fit with it?
So I think the software vendors have done a much better job recently. I think if you go back to the days of ISIS4XL and the other tools, the startup time was definitely negatively impacted. I think now a lot of the Excel add-ins, they're not activated or functional until you do that first function or utilizing the tool. And so I believe JChem4XL falls in that realm, that it doesn't, there's not a significant overhead for Excel startup time. It's just when you start to utilize the functionality that it is actually computing.
Just curious how you measured your adoption and usage rates. Is that something built in? Because that would be really useful, actually. I think people frequently wonder how much is this tool actually being used?
Yeah, I actually did look at the Apache log file, so that did help a little bit, but the problem was it doesn't really, I could then do a reverse lookup on the IP address and see the chemist and all of that. So that did help a little bit. And that's another side benefit that I failed to mention. But actually, the way that I did that was I actually went and talked to each of the chemists. And that's where I actually found some other additional information about why they didn't use it or why they chose to use it and how they were using it. That just told me that, they fired it off, but it didn't tell me any other pieces of information.